Welcome, everyone, to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host, and this fabulous episode is joined by the incomparable Laurie Kerwin-Ashman, who is now a longtime friend, former acolyte of mine,
Yes.
who is a fabulous screenwriter, newbie-ish Star Wars fan. You've been here for a little while now.
Yeah. About 5 years.
And has just released a brand new Audible audio drama, been part of writing it, and it's called Strange Case. And I want to just pitch it, promote it.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. As MC said, The Strange Case is basically a sort of very weird, action-packed, psychological female take on Jekyll and Hyde.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I wrote on it so long ago, like literally last year before the strikes happened. So I wrote 2 episodes and I was part of the writer's room and developing the story and everything. And yeah, I tried my best to make it as weird and mythic and psychological as possible because that's my thing. So yeah, I'm really excited. I haven't actually listened to it yet, so I'm hearing with everyone else, but it has a great cast. It's Vanessa Kirby and David Oyelowo. I'm really excited to hear it, and yeah, I hope people like it. I generally can't remember what happened. It's like experiencing it for the first time. But yeah, it's out on Audible now, and it was created by the Derek Kolstad, who's the guy who came up with the John Wick franchise.
Oh wow, yeah. That's great.
It has sort of assassin, spy, action stuff in there as well.
So cool. We're here to talk about Oshamir, which is the ship of New Dreams ship, between Osha and Chimera, or the Stranger in the series, The Acolyte. We were both really, really fascinated by it. You could actually feel the energy of the fandom quadruple,
yes,
like in size. When the Oshamir moments happened within the season, and there's a lot of reasons behind that, and we want to dig into some of those. But we specifically wanted to just have an episode where we talked about them. So there's going to be a little bit of mythology, a little bit of geeking out about shipping and romance in Star Wars, and answering a ton of questions from audience members. I think it'll be a really fun episode. So thank you for joining us.
Yes, I'm excited to gush and try and sound smart whilst also being feral.
Be feral. People want to hear it. Come on. Just as a reminder, like and subscribe to keep up with the show. Share it out if there's something interesting to you. It helps people find it, talk about The Acolyte. I also did an entire series with Missy on The Acolyte episode by episode, which dug into a lot of the myth and symbolism. Some of that will be repeated in this, but it's actually more specifically into why this ship works, which is great. And then if you are interested in renewing The Acolytes, it has not yet officially been announced that it's been renewed. So please, please, please do watch it again, share it with your friends, be an evangelist, and talk about it. Enjoy it, because we really would like to see another season. We really would like to see more of these characters and more of this world, and really just let Leslie cook.
Yes, 100%. There's basically, we're going to try and get hashtag renew the Acolyte trending every Tuesday, which is obviously when the episodes were coming out. So we're there's a core kind of group of fans who are trying to come up with like different themed campaigns every week. And the next one for next Tuesday is hashtag Accolympics, which is on brand with the Olympics happening. So it's just going to be, we're trying to encourage people to write sports and Olympics themed fan fiction, fan art, make silly memes, imagine which characters do which sport, all that kind of stuff. And great. Just keep that hashtag trending.
And also just like the energy of the fandom going as well. And this helps us sort of evangelize The Acolyte, because there's probably people out there that heard a negative review from somebody on YouTube and was like, I'm not going to give it a chance. When really, it's really funny because I've been kind of just, stalking Reddit, and every time there's a post that's like, I don't know what you were talking about, this was great. I love it.
Yes.
Like, it's so good. And then people are talking about all the things that they love about the show. And you can see when people are like, but it wasn't a very good show. It's just like, it's like there's some sort of psychological block because of the femme gaze of the story, because of misogyny, that a lot of fans are having to get over. And so we have to beat them with enthusiasm.
Yes, 100%. It's been really cool to kind of see people reporting in from like places that I'm not necessarily in, like TikTok, and being like, seeing people in the comments under these sort of like sexy fan edits being like, this is Star Wars, or like, this is the Acolyte, like what? Yeah. Oh my God, I'm 100% going to watch now. And yeah, the amount of people I've had responding to my tweets being like, I've literally never watched a Star Wars before, but I'm going to now because this looks like it was made for me. So yeah, it's been really cool to have that kind of fresh energy and see people getting into not just the Acolyte, but Star Wars via this show.
The fresh energy is the thing that I'm loving the most, because it's people who have never connected with Star Wars before are being called to by this show. And that is saying, oh, hey, Disney, Lucasfilm, you're growing your audience.
Yes.
And maybe you need to give it some time. Yeah. So just a little pre-warning about mythic symbolism. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to get into. This show itself, What the Force, typically digs into things from a meta-analysis, mythological fairy tale folklore lens. I use a lot of femme gaze as well as feminine interpretations because there's a distinct lack of that in the Star Wars sphere. And I like to help people view things from that lens. When you talk about mythic story, which Star Wars is a mythopoeia, it often will resonate with your whole unconscious. And so sometimes you're going to say you identify with a particular character, like, you know, Rey, or you identify with Luke. But the whole story, when you actually watch it, will be like all of the characters are in your unconscious at the time that you're watching. And this happens because of the archetypes in our brains, and we're human and raised in a human society. And these archetypes are very familiar to us. That doesn't account for cultural differences, obviously, with archetypes, but it is, generally speaking, just because one story might not necessarily resonate with you doesn't mean there isn't benefit to understanding all of the characters, all of the experiences within the story. And that was just a little pre-warning. Fairy tales are very similar. Folklore is very similar. Mythology is very similar. And Star Wars functions as a mythology, which is fun for me.
Yes.
The goals of this episode is to talk about Oshamir and why it works in a lot of ways and what it's doing psychologically, and then dig into some questions. So let's start there. Why does this work for us?
I feel like initially, so I feel like when it really kind of hit for me was episode 6, Teach Corrupt. And I remember watching it, and I'm in the UK, so it drops at like 2 a.m. And I was watching it, and I was literally just like clutching my face the whole time, like looking like the scream emoji, because, and my biggest thing was like, I can't believe this is Star Wars. Like, I can't believe this is happening. And so explicitly and so intentionally. And by this, I mean like romance, very loud and like very intentional, as I say, but also like sensuality and lust and seduction and desire and all these things that, you know, I love in storytelling in general, but, you know, Star Wars is not historically super leaned into in a very explicit way. And yeah, I was literally just like typing in caps lock on Twitter, just like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Like, he's naked and he's like talking towards her, and it's like, what is like what? So yeah, so we had some like clues that there was, you know, a kind of vibe, but with Star Wars, often that vibe stays very much in the subtextual realm.
Yeah.
And then in episode 6, it just like shot to the surface and was like, no, yeah, we're doing this. We're in this. Leslie was like, balls to the wall, literally. Let's go. Like, so yeah, that was kind of my initial just being like, oh my God, like, yeah, I can't believe that this is happening in Star Wars. And yeah, that twin feeling of also like, oh, this was made specifically for me and people like me who enjoy this kind of thing in storytelling. And yeah, that was just like so thrilling.
Like there is definitely a Reylo adjacent element to this. I don't think that they are Reylo. I really want to clarify that. There's a Reylo adjacency in that it is following similar archetypes. So specifically in episode 2, when he notices that she is not Osha, or she's not May, Osha is actually there, and his entire energy changes from this silly, goofy guy to a predator. And I talk a lot about this in the podcasts we did on that specific episode, and then later on in Day, and then in Night, and then he completely switches again when we get to Teach Corrupt, which is great. But the predator aspect is deeply significant from a psychological development perspective because of this idea that the feminine is special. It's special in the patriarchy. It is something that is undervalued in the patriarchy, and thus this like hidden treasure almost of energy that is oftentimes not understood by the masculine. And so in fairy tales, folklore, and in myth, there is often a predatorial element that wants the feminine to be kept under control and only in a specific lens of behavior. And when it isn't in that, the predator tries to control it and take it over. And it's also a big, important developmental archetype for the early development of anybody, in that we are fighting against not only authority as we grow up, but also predatory elements in our psyche and in our culture. And so to overcome those sometimes means the predator is transformed into a mentor or protector, or sometimes the predator is overcome and killed. And in this, it's satisfying because the predator is actually taken in and turned into something else. And that's always interesting. It also has a lot of the ties to when you first meet a beastly husband or a monster husband. And that ties to a union of opposites, which psychologically we crave, because that is the key for us to take different and disparate pieces of our psyche and blend them together through apotheosis, understanding that we are not separated, that we are a whole being with our shadows, bruises, darkness, light. All of these things make up a whole person and not just a segmented individual, something that is sliced up. And so again, when I talk about how the archetypes will resonate across the whole story, it's because all of it needs to be viewed as one story, not just this particular lens. Sometimes we need to look at the whole thing, including the relationship between Osha and May, and the relationship between Osha and Chimera, and the relationship they have all together. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like one of the most intoxicating things that I've seen so many people kind of identify about Chimera is, this sort of like constantly changing, evolving, showing different sides of himself, and, kind of that juxtaposition between how he positioned himself in that relationship with May, and then how much that contrasts with how we see things play out on screen with Osha. And I think that's like so fascinating, because oftentimes with these kind of dark, masculine, villainous characters, they're very kind of like one-dimensional, and they just represent like one thing, and for everything else to kind of butt up against or to like mirror back everything else. Whereas like, Chimera just is, very slippery.
Yeah.
and that in itself is quite seductive productive because
Yeah.
you're constantly on the back foot. And yeah.
There was a quote from Leslie or somebody that, like, originally in the script there was like, "I've crossed oceans to find you," which is a quote from Dracula. And
Yes.
Dracula himself is a shapeshifter, and shapeshifter archetypes encourage transformation of the self. They encourage you to look at the fact that not everything is the same. Not everything needs to fit into boxes like the Jedi or the Sith. Maybe there's an alternative path to all of this conversation. We're going to talk more about Daemon Incubus lover pieces a little bit in a minute, but I did want to bring up something from the dangerous lover motif, which is going to be my punctuating point to this, but I think it's important because you brought it up so quickly that, so there was a period of time, the Byronistic period of time, where dangerous lover motifs were heavy involved in the Romantic period. And I have this great book by Deborah Lutz, who talks about the dangerous lover motif in especially that period of time and the fiction that was coming out, from the Bronte sisters, Byron, all of that. And it's sort of her punctuating point on the meaning of the dangerous lover, which is the dangerous lover meaning comes from those who desire him, those who themselves long as deeply as he does. One must wonder whether or not the dangerous lover can even be seen except through the lens of a woman's desire. The true meaning of this figure is located in the one who desires him, who constructs him as the mysterious well of passion through her imagination and yearning for infinity. The heroine is haunted by this fantasy she constructs and lets this ideal take over her sexual being as a ghost or vampire might. She constructs and then confronts the terrifying coming together with the sublime annihilation of dark transcendence and unspeakable acts. She desires and hence creates the unknown, the impossible, the ineffable. She steps into and outside when she takes his hand. And outside that holds the possibility of freedom, of death, of the infinite morning, of entering into transcendent meaning.
Woo.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Please tell us.
If we are bound by our societal archetypes and our societal structures and our institutions that say, no, you cannot love, or no, you cannot have more than one person in your life of significance, i.e. the Sith. You're only allowed two in the Sith. Or you can't really love anybody. You can't go that far. Maybe it's all wrong, and taking a dark person's hand is actually what you need to do and change the system. Nice.
Love that. And that very much feels like what is kind of being set up in the Acolyte. Sure.
And the dangerous lover proposes an alternative to society, telling us what we're allowed to have. And it's all based in femme desire.
Yeah. And that's literally the role that Kainai plays in episode 6 in particular, in that he's just sort of exists to kind of very gently but very intently kind of probe Osha's whole kind of belief system and identity and what she's kind of, the thing that she's been sold, by the Jedi, and what she's been brought up to believe about how the world works, and what, these like really strict binaries of what is good and what is bad, and what kind of person she should be, and, trying to be Saul's perfect Jedi daughter and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, he just exists to kind of hold this mirror up to all of that and be like, well, it didn't work for me, and it doesn't seem to have worked for you. So I found a different way. This is my way. I'm just going to tell you my perspective. I'm just going to ask you questions. I'm just going to, I'm just going to be here being hot and, shattering your sense of self. And just see what happens. As in, he's not like kind of, I think what we've all identified as being so great about his dynamic and the way that Manny has sort of like crafted the performance and the way that Leslie has talked about it is they're very like insistent that it not be manipulative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that it's her choice. It's her choice along this whole way. So that's the idea of the positive corruption arc, which leans into that idea of desire. And because we classify women who make their own choices as evil in the patriarchal culture, that this is the pathway to the anti-dominator culture.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, a lot of people compare this to Enemies to Lovers, which I actually only think that they only teased it a little tiny bit at the beginning. I love, though, that Leslie loves Enemies to Lovers and is considering it in her mind as something that is valuable to tell as a story.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think this is one of the things that really differentiates it from Reylo, in that the Enemies to Lovers kind of dynamic is kind of only really exists for like an episode or two, and not even really massively playing out on screen. And then it very immediately starts to kind of bloom into this like very different thing. And I think like because like Reylo were actually like physically separated for a really like for quite a big chunk of the sequel trilogy, whereas like very quickly these two are kind of,
there isn't a war they're fighting.
And they're not kind of on like they are on like opposite sides ideologically at first, but it's not like I'm fighting for this side and you're fighting for that side and we're actively in combat to try and win an ultimate goal. It's very much more like internal and cerebral, and it's much more about like philosophies and upbringings, and they're reckoning with these internal wounds and their own past.
And it ties more to psychological opposites and resolution of, like what you said, the internalized wounds, in that when you find the truth in another person, you are able to pick that up and heal yourself and make yourself more whole. And so the fact that both Chimere and Osha have been wounded by the Jedi is really satisfying, and that they have different paths that they've gone on and will teach each other something out of this.
Yeah. But I think like what it does do in terms of, that is specific to like the Enemies to Lovers trope and why people love that trope so much. And this is something that I wrote as part of the series Bible for my own epic fantasy story. And I'll just like quickly read it out, because I basically like, this was a few years ago now, I kind of did a shout out on Twitter because I just wanted to see how people articulated like why they loved Enemies to Lovers so much. And this is basically kind of what I condensed it into, and I think this applies to like the burgeoning of Oshamir, which is Enemies to Lovers is such a powerful, satisfying, and popular trope because it often cuts to the truth of two individuals and builds a relationship upon that foundation. So it's the reverse of a normal relationship journey. So instead of the rose-tinted honeymoon period, which often blinds us to flaws and reality, two people who start off as enemies see the worst in each other. They see each other at their worst, doing the worst things, and then they learn to love each other despite that as they each go on a journey of growth and betterment. So that means that the love that they find at the end of that journey is therefore like extremely potent and authentic and moving, and they truly see each other and have chosen to love each other against all odds. And I think that ties into like my main thing about the Oshamir dynamic, is that it's sort of built on this foundation of Chimere like truly like seeing Osha. And offering that to her kind of for the first time. Because if you look at his past, like, the witch coven thing, she didn't feel truly seen or like part of that
too.
And she wasn't seen and heard by May, who's like her other half. And even though they got to a place where her mother was going to let her go to the Jedi, obviously that all ends in tragedy. So then she loses everything as a result of that desire to be seen and heard. And then she goes into the Jedi, and then it's kind of becomes more like her trying to be Soul's perfect Jedi daughter and trying to be the perfect Jedi. But that doesn't work either because of all of her pain and her grief and her suffering. And so she's never really truly seen or accepted by the Jedi either. They just want her to be the way they want her to be instead of accepting her for how she is. And so that's why Kainai feels so powerful when he comes along, because he's kind of the first person to sort of stand in front of her and be like, I see you, all of you. And yes, I have a wish and an agenda, and I want you to become my acolyte, but I'm not forcing that on you. I'm not pushing that on you. I'm saying, there is a way off this island. You can go. I'm like constantly turning my back on you. I'm letting you hold my saber. I'm like very much letting you know that this is all up to you, that you hold the power in this situation. You need to step into your agency. And I see you for the things that you've been told. And I value the things that you've been told are negatives about you, which is the strength of your emotion and the things that you've been through. So I think that's like that really intoxicating dynamic that is prevalent in a lot of like enemies to lovers, where like, yes, they start off as enemies, but then what brings them together is that they both realize that they're so much more similar than they are different,
Yeah. And that follows into sort of the daemon lover or incubus lover archetypes that happen in fairy tales, in that the incubus lover daemon in the story often represents the shadow or a shadow version of the animus inside of the person's unconscious. And because the darkness is so seductive to Osha, she assimilates quite quickly into the shadow. She starts to dress like him almost immediately. And that means that she started to assimilate aspects of the shadow by taking on his sort of animal skin in it. And this is part of the process that we all go through psychologically when we go through an ego death, which allows us to psychologically transform and outgrow previous belief structures that may not have worked for us, or that may have been harming us actively because of our way that we have built our ego and persona out there in the world. So Osha was this perfect girl, but couldn't make it. And she basically, was still a Jedi in her mind, even if she wasn't actually a Jedi. And Chimera challenges all of that in the way that he approaches her as a friend, as somebody who's not going to hurt her, who's not going to judge her either. What I find really amazing about the demonic son in fairy tales is often they are the child of a good or mystical queen and king, which is why we also feel similarities to Ben Solo in Chimera, in that he is the son of Han and Leia. So he's like a mystical child in so many ways. And so Chimera, we have a very similar feeling because he is feeling like that archetype. And so that's why a lot of people are like, "Ooh, this feels the same." And it's because it often is the same archetypically. When we start to break down our ego, dissolve our ego, this symbolically is just like Inanna descending into the underworld, the Sumerian princess or goddess who descended to go and visit Ereshkigal, her sister, in the underworld and was killed. She was stripped of all of her garments. That's what happens to us. We're dissolved ego-wise. We're stripped of everything we think we are. And Chimera goes through that process. We think we're one thing. We think we have feelings and sensations that are organized by our memories. And if we don't reject that through denial, fantasy, rationalization, regression, isolation, projection, displacement, we have an opportunity to consolidate all of the negative and positive things that we know about ourselves and become more whole once we reach the lowest point and spiritually die. And this is important. If we do it voluntarily, then it means something, rather that we are active in our desire to own our whole selves, good and bad, rather than having it done to us from a story perspective. And we've seen a lot more of these stories, like My Lady Jane, which I just finished. I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful animal groom story. I hope it also gets a second season.
Yeah, I'm like halfway through, but I haven't finished.
It's so good. But also in The Acolyte, when she marries him under the willow tree, where she accepts him, he's in the mask. He's in the monster outfit. So she accepts the darkness. She is marrying the monster voluntarily. That's significant.
That's so cool. I hadn't thought about that part. Yeah, that's sick.
And this all plays into the feminine gaze, which I'm obsessed with, because it's anti-patriarchal. Having feelings on main, having desires on main, talking about these things and our feelings and facing our darkness is not something that the patriarchy says is okay. You're supposed to just be the good girl, Osha. You're supposed to be the maiden. You're supposed to be stuck in your your damselhood.
Yeah. Locked away in a tower and kept safe by daddy.
Yeah. And this entire story is primarily about breaking Osha out of this, glowing white tower that Soul has put her in.
Yeah. And that's I think that's what so many of us are kind of picking up on with regards to Chimere and Manny's performance, because it just feels so intentionally crafted via the female gaze, femme gaze, and designed to appeal to that kind of audience, for sure. Like it feels femme, but it also feels like queer as well in a lot of ways. And there's like a lot of crossover between all those kind of things for sure. And I think again, this kind of ties back to what I was saying about enemies to lovers, in terms of the fact that it's like from the beginning, this relationship that we're seeing blossoming between Osha and Chimere is kind of built on this foundation and starts from a place of like truth and honesty and vulnerability. And like the big difference between his relationship with May is like he made a very strong choice to remain hidden from her, essentially, in terms of his like true identity, literally in terms of his face. She never sees his face when he's playing the role of her master. And then because from jump, like that's not the case with Osha, like she sees his sort of chimera personality first in The Apothecary. And then in episode 5, he's unmasked in front of everyone. So when he like whisks her away to the island, he inevitably has to make a different kind of choice in terms of like, okay, I want to try and build something with this person that I'm really drawn to and intrigued by, and that I see a lot of myself in. So I've tried the whole like mysterious evil master thing. Like, why don't I try actually just like
being honest
and being myself? And like, that's literally what, like, obviously the nudity is like great because
but it's
he's very attractive, but it's symbolic of vulnerability. It's nakedness, both literal and metaphorical. And so it's so cool to see that stuff work on so many layers. Like obviously the top layer is just like all horniness and being like, oh my god, he's so hot and he's naked and it's Star Wars. But then it's also like this is telling us something subconsciously, and that feeds into the wider themes and this relationship that's being built symbolizes.
And a story will be more powerful if they're not only telling it on the textual level, the subtextual level, but also the symbolic level. It's like a triple threat. And he legitimately says, if you're not going to join me.
Like, Leslie literally said this in one of the interviews. I think she's just like, every single line is a double entendre. Like everything to her is, and that's intentional. It's like, supposed to be, we're supposed to
about lightsabers.
Associate lightsabers with you know what? And
they go back into the cave. Like, it's symbolic. It's his bedroom. Like they're in his bedroom, but it's also a cave, which represents, a womb, a place of rebirth. It's wet, it's moist. It's from a Clarissa Pinkola Estes perspective. It's where she's meant to be reborn and to remember her own power.
Yeah. And even there's like a shot where they have that confrontation in episode 6 over the lightsaber, and it's shot like the two of them are framed like through the very, vaginal cave opening. And then there's this incredibly phallic rock formation that's
right
like
behind them.
And they're literally like grappling over this like lightsaber in both of their hands, and they're like very close, and it's very like tense on lots of different levels. And yeah, I'm just like, sometimes when I tweet this stuff, people are like, what are you talking about, phallic rocks and stuff? And I'm like, it's there. Trust me, it's there. It's Star Wars. They love a genital rock formation. Like, they're everywhere in Star Wars.
Just go and watch.
I know I sound crazy.
Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, which I literally did the other night, and it's crazy. Like, that's just like,
just go and watch Attack of the Clones. It's everywhere. That arena, it's just George.
Yeah, like it's not subtle.
It's not. No, and also George was really into tentacles and caves, and all of this symbolism is stuff that he has always known. He's always known this stuff, and especially when he got really, really deep into Joseph Campbell.
Yeah,
so it's been in there since the beginning, friends. Yeah. But what does all this mean for us? Because the challenge, like what I said with that quote from the Dangerous Lovers book, is that we're seeking an alternative to what society says we're allowed to have.
Yeah.
Which ties back to Chimere saying, we got to kill the dream of the Jedi.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like when we had there's like the recent Vulture interview with Leslie, where I think that was the first time she explicitly talked about her background as coming from a very kind of strict Christian background, and how that tied into how she kind of approached the Jedi and this idea, and where that kind of line we hear in the first episode, the Acolyte kills the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see how that plays out and what that actually means, and that Osha is the one who kills the dream of the Jedi within herself, and then also very, literally on screen with Sol. And I feel like this ties into like, the really big thing that links both like Osha and Chimere, which is that they have had these kind of identities and belief systems of the Jedi Order kind of stripped from them.
Mm-hmm.
And then Leslie kind of talking about this idea of like the beautiful dream, which is offered by a lot of kind of institutional religions. And that's the thing that the institution exists to protect and lift up and make alluring to people. It's this beautiful dream of, if you just follow these rules and you live like this and you listen to us and you do what you're told, then you'll, unlock this like beautiful dream of how the world and what life could be, not just here, but in the afterlife as well. And so much of her approach to the Jedi and picking apart the flaws of the institution of the Jedi is like linked so much clearly to like her past experience of growing up within a kind of religious institution, and then also being a woman, and then also like being a gay woman, and not just in the world but also in the industry. She's talked a lot about how that has fed into the Stranger and Chimere being this kind of her own like shadow self on screen, because what he wants is freedom to just like wield his power and be self-actualized outside of these boxes and these institutions that say like you shouldn't exist, or we don't want you to exist, or we want to put limitations on what you can do and how you can do it. So yeah, it feels like the overall kind of theme of both these characters, but also what they represent as a couple and as a relationship going forward, is just this idea of like killing the old dream to make room for a new one. So building something new, like as individuals, but also like as a relationship and as dark side force users.
And the ego resists this. I should say that. Like, this is an ego death inside of ourselves, because transformation fundamentally happens within before it can happen without. Like, with outside of you. You have to transform internally, and your ego will resist it because of how you've been socialized and the truth that you accept. But it's important, because if you want to change society, you have to change yourself first.
Yes. 100%. And I feel like a lot of the questions that we got, and a lot of the stuff that Leslie has been talking about in interviews, like, ties into this idea of what that future outside of these institutions and outside of those dreams kind of look like. Because if they stay on the Sith path,
it's
then,
not
like,
good.
they are. It's not good. And I think a lot of people kind of panicked when they heard Leslie first say, like, oh, they're doomed.
They could be doomed.
They could be doomed, but that is kind of under the umbrella of if they try and stay on this Sith power of two.
Because fundamentally, the Sith and the Jedi are the same, even though they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. They are both part of the dominator culture, which doesn't allow you to be your own person and choose your own path.
And doesn't allow you to be a whole person.
Yeah.
Like, because certain parts of
the Jedi
certain parts.
And the Sith themselves are separated by the fundamental difference of one group desires nothing but emotion and emotional passion and things like that. And one group says, no, you have to be aesthetic and strip all of that away, especially your attachments. And so only together, actually, if they could come with some sort of balance themselves, could they actually represent a healing of the galaxy itself. But they refuse to do that. And so the pendulum swings once again. I do want to just briefly say that I refer to several sources from the lenses that I talk about. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who was a Jungian psychologist who talks about myth and folklore, primarily in her seminal work, Women Who Run with the Wolves, the Wild Woman Archetype. And that's like almost, what does the feminine look like without the patriarchy, which is great. The other references that I'll make are often to Maureen Murdoch, which wrote the book The Heroine's Journey, which is, how does the journey out of patriarchy look for the feminine? But it's still under patriarchy in the story. So there's a lot of fighting against the patriarchy, reclaiming your power from the patriarchy, etc. And then I'll also talk about Joseph Campbell, who later in his work, he actually started to get a more anti-patriarchal lens, understanding what stories of the feminine and the goddess figure looked like. But it wasn't until kind of the end of his career. So early on work, the Hero with 1,000 Faces had a lot of patriarchal lenses in it, but he went on a journey himself throughout his career, and speaking with especially Maria Gambudis, who was covering and studying the goddess figure in pre-Neolithic and Neolithic periods and leading up to when we started to develop this very patriarchal lens in our societies, that he actually himself had experienced growth. Imagine that, over the course of his life. And so I tend to lean into his lenses that are later in his life, whereas I can tell when somebody stopped reading Campbell and are using earlier lenses. And I just wanted to set that expectation that I tend to view things in this journey out of patriarchy or anti-patriarchal feminine lens, because it helps give us a goal for our story to imagine a world without patriarchy, where we aren't telling people that they can't feel their emotions.
Yeah.
Or they can't necessarily, they don't have to live always in anger either, which is also very Sith-like.
Men have to behave like this and women have to behave like this. Or even that the categories of men and women are these strict binaries.
Yeah, exactly. What does beyond binary look like is the question that fundamentally Star Wars looks at, like, even though they don't always explicitly say it.
Yeah, and I feel like what the Acolyte has set up in this first season is like the closest I feel, because this is the thing that I love most about Star Wars, is the way that it holds up these binaries and then forces you to kind of question them and pick them apart and see them clash and see the tension. And the goal is to show that the world doesn't operate that simply, and that actual true balance and enlightenment will involve transcending those binaries. But we often don't get to see what that actually looks like play out on screen. We're usually watching people fail.
There is a lot of failure. There's the key successful moment for the original trilogy is when Luke is told by Yoda and by Obi-Wan, hey, you got to go kill your father. And he is being told by Vader and Palpatine, hey, you got to go kill your father. And he says, I am not going to kill my father. The two sides were saying the same thing, and Luke said no.
Yeah. But again, it's like, it's a moment. It's and it's really cathartic and moving and like beautiful. But then, I feel like, I don't know, it feels like the Acolyte is trying to like really push this idea as far as it will go, and see it like play out, and see two people grapple with that and see if they can build something new.
Because we didn't get the lesson in the first place, right? And we need more lessons. We need more examples. We need more transcendence. We need more past binaries. That has always been the message of Star Wars. But we need more. We need more beyond duality.
Yes, 100%.
You want to dig into questions?
Yeah, I think that leads us. I mean, we're going to be rehashing all of this out, because a lot of the questions feed into what we've just been talking about a lot. So we had so many amazing questions. I did a shout out on Twitter saying that we were going to be doing this episode. And if people had questions or specific things that they wanted us to discuss with regards to Oshamir, and I've kind of split them into categories. Should we just go with the ones that are specifically about Chimera?
Sure. I love this first question, by the way.
Yes.
So Evan Harris, EV9, good friend of What the Forest. Thank you, Evan, for the question. Curious how soon we'll learn Chimera's real name, if it is, in fact, even Chimera. And what is the mythological significance of a name change and how that affects his relationship with Osha.
Yes, I actually did a lot of people have been talking about this on Twitter, and I did a little, I didn't even think it was necessarily a thread, but I tweeted about this idea of true names, which is something that comes up a lot in mythology and folklore. And it's this idea that everything kind of has like a true name, and you see it. It's an idea that's really beautifully explored in the Earthsea books by Ursula Gwyn, and also like Rumpelstiltskin really is a fairy tale that hinges on a true name. But basically, how it works is that if you know someone or something's true name, that gives you power over them. And often it also stops them from being able to hurt you or trick you, manipulate you, harm you in some way. So it feels quite significant that we don't know who this person, what this person's like true name is. You know, it's made very clear that Chimera is a persona that he created. Perhaps
the stranger is also a persona he's created
specifically just and Chimera might have been created specifically just for May, and the stranger is his sort of
monster skin
monster persona that's supposed to intimidate and also like protect him. And in episode 5 he's very clear about the things that he values above all, and that is his identity remaining anonymous and mysterious so that he can operate outside of the Jedi and not be found and controlled or hurt by them. So and he very specifically says, I have no name. So this idea of what this character's true name is being set up to be a very significant thing and a very significant moment when that is revealed specifically to Osha because this relationship is being set up to be the thing of the show.
So tying that to Vernestra's reveal that she recognizes him and he is her former pupil, it means that she has his true name.
Yes.
Information that Osha doesn't have, and that in a psychological way, you cannot be a whole person if you are denying aspects of yourself. And so that is why Chimera is actually not accepted his darkness, although he purported to have accepted his darkness to soul in a bragging fashion in episode Night. He actually has things he has revealed, and symbolically, it all tied to his rebirth, the destruction of his lightsaber. Vernestra shows up almost right away, and he hides from her. He is in denial of this aspect of himself, which is something that he has to overcome. And usually how that happens is your anima finds out your true name and doesn't use it against you.
Yes.
So this happens in modern story all the time whenever there's like, oh, your secret identity is actually X. As long as your anima loves that secret about you or expresses it with kindness and compassion, it is a wound that is healed and could tie into healing the wounded masculine.
Yes, 100%. And it feels, from a relationship point of view, that is going to be a point that will only bring them closer together and allow them to see each other more fully and wholly with more honesty. And sort of, because his true name is obviously intertwined with his past, which we know has been, very painful and is tied to the Jedi and Vernestra. And that's the main point of connection between him and Osha. So all of that is going to be really intertwined within the relationship that they go on to build together.
The secret is that he has to be healed with that in mind. And that's telling us all of that. Him not having a real name that we know, all of that. All of his scars as well, which let's dig into the next question, which is little Hope Punk on Twitter, Mitsubishi Beanie. Yeah. There's one detail I've been wondering about, which is, I'm not sure if it was mentioned in the podcast. Chimera has a wound on his left arm where he's wearing his cortosis protector. Is there any symbolic meaning hidden in the placement of this wound? I would say that it is not the same as the thigh wound, leg wounds that we've been getting throughout the show. That is a very specific mythic motif tying to the Fisher King, which represents impotence or lack of power, or Sick King, which is tied to the Jedi themselves, Soul, Yord, Jackie. Like, they all got thigh wounds in that episode, which is showing like the sickness. An arm wound specifically shows vulnerability and dependence, and is a prompt for him to engage in introspection and the necessity to seek out help from others. And I think this is very interesting that the next episode that we have with him and Osha, he is entirely honest with his emotions and how he feels and not manipulative, because that is an excellent tie to that.
Yes. And also something that this question prompted me to kind of connect. And again, as with a lot of this stuff, I have no idea if this is intentional or not. But the placement of that wound, which he gets when the cortosis, like gauntlet, kind of gets smashed, is like just below the elbow. And that is the exact place that he touches Osha repeatedly in the next episode, which is something I tweeted about because it felt like such a really beautifully crafted, intentional connection. And like, this is the kind of thing you get when you work with intimacy coordinators, because every single time that he touches her in that next episode, it's always in that place, like on her like forearm, but like just below the elbow. And it's like, it's incredibly intimate and tender without being inappropriate or predatory or threatening in any kind of way. And it's him signaling to her, like, I'm a safe person. I want to comfort you, but I'm not going to encroach on your agency or your body in an inappropriate way. And yeah, that's the kind of like beautiful, really intentional stuff you get when you work with like an intimacy coordinator and everyone is crafting what is this touch signaling to the audience.
And oftentimes in relationships, when we're seeking empathy, we give people what we want to receive. And so he is touching her arm where he is wounded, in that he sees himself in her and would like to be touched in the same way.
Baby wants a hug.
He wants to be intimate with her, and he wants her to be intimate with him. Whoa.
Yes. Yeah.
I love symbolism.
And then in the finale, he kind of upgrades, and then it becomes hand.
Like, yeah.
Hand, which is obviously a level up in terms of like intimacy.
They're to first base? Is that first base?
It's first base in this universe. Yeah. Sure. I mean,
what are the bases of Star Wars?
Oh my gosh, let's do a whole other podcast on that.
More Chimera questions. Posy Rosie, Chimera changing archetypes was a big discussion in what the Force, from predator to lover and more. He's constantly changing. Do you think that he's aware of how he adapts to Osha, or has he always been this way? What is the theme and archetype that you see him shift to next? The Chimera. Okay, so I do think that he is aware of what he is doing because he is very smart. And one of the archetypes we talked about from a shadow archetype perspective is the vixen, which most aggressive shadow archetypes fall into a goal for survival, right? So you're fighting against something that you view to be dangerous or cannot protect others against, and so you become aggressive in your outputs towards them. As far as what I see him turning into, I think he's gonna try his dangdest to be a queen, and will probably fail, which is, I want to build a family. I want to protect my little baby. Because but there's obviously challenges to him building a family with Osha.
A very creepy, long-fingered
roommate. Look, I pointed out that dark, weird ass hole at the front of his bed.
So I heard you talk about this. I still need to go back and find this hole, because I was like, what are you talking about? That's terrible.
It's literally his bed. It's like the head of it is into like a giant like hole into the mountain. It looks like industrialized, and I'm like, the feng shui of this room is all off.
Really dark side.
And if that's where Plagueis hangs out, ew.
Yeah, so creepy.
Okay. On to Osha questions.
Yes. At shirts_leaves, we've now seen Osha kill in rage, but she hasn't acted with anywhere near the same ruthlessness as Chimera. I'm really curious to see how things develop in that respect in season 2. Can Osha seriously be chill with Chimera's lack of remorse, let alone emulate it herself? Okay.
Do you want to go first?
No.
Okay, so Chimera is already questioning whether he can be as dark side as he thinks he can be, because he has compassion and is scared of the dark side consequences for Osha. And how we know that is the helmet scene.
Yes.
He loses his mind and is willing to fight through her darkness and her power to protect her from the ill consequences of the decisions that he has pushed her towards. And that is called compassion and love, which is not actually a dark side thing. It is the thing that connects us to the light and to others. The darkness craves companionship, but if you are a true dark user, you want to control others. And in this situation, he only wants what is best for Osha. And actually, when she falls to the darkness, he offers compassion and remorse for what has happened to her in his face and in his acting. Like, Manny, you did amazing on this. Because you're listening to this podcast, I can tell. No.
Yeah, we're speaking directly to Manny.
Manny, you are amazing in this. And if you hear this, I've loved your entire career. So his remorse at her fall knows what he has done. And that remorse, that compassion, that care, that love is all going to be fighting against him internally, as the dark side is not something that involves in that, right? You want companionship in the dark, but it ends up being parasitic and controlling.
Yeah, and the companionship is built on a foundation of like, what does this give me?
Yeah.
Essentially,
what
do we build together. It's, you make me more powerful, or like having you is useful to me in some way. But
I am subsuming your power to make my power bigger, rather than this sort of idea that when you hurt, I hurt. And that is the opposite. That is a light side thing. When you hurt, I hurt is the basis of compassion and love and our interconnectedness with all things. And freaking Chimera might go through apotheosis just based on his love of Osha alone.
Yeah, and you can see how shocking it is for him in that moment, like the anguish on his face as he's like hurting because she's hurting is like so extreme. And also just like the very fact that he like darts towards her and is immediately like literally forced to his knees. He's like literally kind of submitted to the force of that like emotion. So yeah, that's kind of telling us that,
So he may not have lack of remorse for the Jedi, but he certainly does have remorse for Osha. And that is the basis and the start of having compassion for all people, because oftentimes the first time that you connect with another person, you see yourself in their eyes and you understand that you are one in the Force, for lack of a better term in Star Wars terms. But in truth, you're interconnected as part of the greater whole. And so this is him opening up to another person, and he's already on his way back.
Yeah, there's this my favorite Mitski song. There's this lyric, I love everybody because I love you.
Oh,
that really
that is the Force. That is the light side. Oh no, he did a light side thing.
We learn to love other people by like our first examples of love, like our family. We learn to love our family, and then we learn that love is extended to the wider thing that you're a part of. And the same with like your first kind of romantic relationship unlocks a different type of love and compassion in you as well.
And it's where like the Jedi sort of are stilted in this idea that they demand perfection of love for everything without ever allowing people to understand it for themselves and go through this journey.
Yeah. Heartbreak makes you more empathetic.
Yeah. Seeing, having like, it kills me what Jackie says, because she says it without really any understanding. We must celebrate people who transitioned into the Force. She doesn't understand grief, so she can't truly understand what she's even saying. Yeah.
And she says it with like, that's conviction of like youth. Like you see it a lot online with very young people kind of tweeting so confidently about things that they actually have not had any lived experience of. It's all this kind of theoretical thing that they've learned via TikToks like and the internet.
Dogmatic repeating of the Jedi tenets
but it's like not backed up by any nuance or complexity that comes with actual lived experience of those things.
And the Jedi haven't lived.
No, not really.
Next question is from Part Pink. Would love to hear what everyone is thinking about the helmet moment and Osha panicking, instinctively controlling his mind. Really, if that is what even happened. Okay, so we kind of talked a little bit about this from Chimera's perspective and what it means, and that he is feeling compassion for her. from an Osha perspective, she being in a cave, having this moment of connection to herself, to her internalized power without anything standing in the way, is connecting to her own internal goddess. And this was just a taste of her full potential and energy and power. She will destroy something by accident in second season. She is that powerful. She will trap something. She will have, the whirlwind of power moment where everything is getting destroyed. And then what we have seen in other stories where there is a very powerful god-like power out there is that love brings them back. So May, Chimera, maybe together.
Yes.
Pulling her out of it.
Oh, it's my favorite style. But also it's incredible that, she's putting on the helmet and she's in this cave. So it's very much, she is, delving into her own subconscious to unlock that power.
Yeah.
And immediately it's the power of her mother.
Yes, I love it. Yeah. It's the feminine, it's the dark
feminine. It's not
feminine.
the Jedi Force, it's the witch coven.
Yeah. And that we were told kind of through the ascension that she wouldn't have access to this. But, Clarissa Pinkola Estes talks about how the wisdom of our ancients is in our bones. And that even though we're told we're not supposed to be connected to it because of the patriarchy or things that we're told, we can't lose it. And where we need to go is into a cave, into the moisture, into the darkness to reconnect with that and pull it back out. And that is the start of her journey, is basically remembering that this is in her, no matter whether she has trained as a Jedi, whether she has forgotten, whether she has gone through ascension or not. That is all just telling us what we can't do rather than opening our minds to what we can.
Yeah, and so much of that kind of inner goddess feminine power that Clarissa talks about is rooted in this idea that it's instinctual.
Yeah.
Right? It comes to you when you need it. You just need to learn how to listen to it. And the helmet in the cave kind of helps her to that place where it's allowed to come through, and it comes through in an incredibly powerful way.
And a lot of that is how we talked about Bluebeard a lot in our episodes. Go back and listen to them if you haven't. But the opening of the door in Bluebeard where we find the death and the death of the former wives. What we found throughout this show is that Chimera wasn't the predator. It was Soul who was keeping her from her power and her knowledge and her knowing who she truly is and all of that. And it's deeply tied in that story to trusting your instincts. Yes. And your desires too. Clarissa wants you to understand that it's okay to have desires too.
And that they can teach us about ourselves, and that there's power in desire and lust and
all of that. Yeah.
All sensations.
Okay. The next one is the liminal zone. More and more talk about Persephone. Please include how many myths she's very capable, loving, calculating queen of the dead.
This is your wheelhouse.
Theseus, he goes down to the underworld and tries to steal stuff from her, tries to actually steal her, and he is punished and actually ends up losing his butt because he gets taken and melded with a stone and loses his ass. This is literally a thing that happens.
I've never heard this one. What do you mean he loses his ass?
It's because it's down in the underworld. He loses his butt. He's the reason that butt implants exist for the first time. Poor Theseus.
Great BBL.
I mean, a lot of the time, Persephone is there as a dark goddess figure, and many other stories, like in Psyche, Aphrodite tries to trick Psyche into a sort of asking for beauty from the goddess of the dead. And that is the secret thing inside of the deep, right? But it ends up she brings it up to the surface. She's interested. She opens the box very Pandora-like, and it ends up killing her. And then she's rescued by Cupid, etc. It's more that what I think the modern interpretation of Persephone that I'm obsessed with is that more modern stories that take on Persephone, Lore Olympus, Hades, the video game, Mythic, the musical, they are interpreting Persephone as having entire choice and desire in marrying the darkness. And I think that is saying more to us about where our society is at psychologically than what the original myths necessarily said. Because sometimes in Greek myths, like the stories themselves are not just psychological archetypes, but they're also explanatory of how the world works. A lot of people interpret the claiming of Persephone and taking her to the underworld as a way to tell how when a woman would be married off to somebody she doesn't know, how it would end up being okay and part of the cycle of life. And that was kind of one lens and one interpretation. I like that we are experiencing transformational myth that is just as valid as any other mythology that we would have back in the time. Just because one person wrote it down many, many, many millennia ago doesn't necessarily mean it's any less valid for our current lens than saying, hey, pomegranates didn't grow in the underworld naturally. That's because Persephone gave them to the underworld. And she ate the pomegranate that she had created in there and thus ate the food of the underworld. So it's all desire and her own positive corruption arc. I think that's more important than necessarily what some of the myths of Persephone previously have said. Although she was a badass queen. And of course, the dark Queen of the Dead, which is like her name, Persephone literally means destroy or slay. It's important because of the dual nature of the goddess. The Queen of the Dead is there with empathy and righteousness, much like how Kali, who is the dark aspect in her dual goddess relationship, is an avenging goddess and kills
the Hindu
demons.
goddess.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's the other half of Pavarti.
Yes.
And she's an avenging goddess and kills demons. And the Queen of the Dead is empathetic death, unless you try to screw with her, and then she's gonna kill you.
Yeah.
It's a long-winded answer. Sorry.
Well, she just said more and more. Yeah, so the next two questions are kind of more or less the same, which I've named the Dark Side Syllabus, which comes Neon Evangelista and also this little Stan girl both asked, what do we think the Dark Side Syllabus is going to look like as Osha and Kainai kind of go into their training? How will it compare to what they learned from the Jedi as former Padawans? What do we think Osha will teach Kaimir and vice versa? And how much of it will involve tapping into the shadow self and the subconscious?
I think we've already gotten a bit of taste of that, which is just opening yourself up to emotions. I certainly don't think that Kaimir will try to teach her in the traditional Palpatine sense of what we have seen him teach others. Because once you accept the darkness, once you're in dark union of it, it actually becomes nothing like all about pain, suffering, and using that hate and that pain and that suffering to tap into power.
Which is mirrored by what Kaimir says to May when he's trying to encourage her to finish Soul. It's almost like word for word the stuff that Palpatine says to Anakin.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of like the what the training will look like, because I think
he's gonna try. So I do think he's gonna try based on what probably Plagueis has done to him.
Well, so this is the thing. A lot of this kind of, and a lot of the questions that we're going to get to next about what the future of Oshamir is going to could look like and how it could play out is really dependent on this idea of Plagueis and his involvement. And because we don't know anything for sure, basically. We don't know if Plagueis is Kaimir's master, if they've even met before, if, Kaimir is, seducing Osha on his behalf. Like we don't know. So, and the answers to those questions will inevitably, affect how it plays out. I mean, all that Leslie's kind of said for sure is that she's really interested in seeing Plagueis essentially mess with this new couple. You don't know if that's going to be because he's Kaimir's master, or because he then reveals himself and gets in the middle of that, or tries to seduce Osha away from Kaimir, or tries to get Kaimir to, push Osha in certain directions. It's really dependent on the Plagueis aspect of it being clarified.
We do know he has been trained in the traditional Sith way because of the repetition of the words that Palpatine has used.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So we do know that he has some of that knowledge. So I think he would try. But like the helmet conundrum, I think that if he hurts her, it will open up his empathy to her. And he won't be able to do it much longer. And there's this, we're going to get into some Dark Union stuff, but there's this amazing quote that Campbell talks about with relation to Tristan and Isolde, where Tristan, at the point that he is condemned because of the poison that he has drunk and fallen in love with Isolde and thus betrayed King Mark, which Dark Union usually follows that sort of idea. He talks about how damned he is in that he loves Isolde enough to break his vow to both Mark, to society, and to the heavens, basically. He is willing to be damned for his love for her. And I think that's where he's going to get to. Yeah.
And I think it's going to be that classic thing of, I got what I thought I wanted, but at what cost?
At what cost? Yeah. And then it'll have him flip around. Yeah.
Which is going to be so delicious. But yeah, in terms of because it's not going to be a sort of classic training, because the both of them are they have Jedi training, so they kind of have all the fighting stuff down. So I think it's going to be more rooted in philosophy. But one thing I'm really looking forward to is kind of seeing, and we saw it in the finale with Osha stepping into her power and kind of marching in front of him and calling the shots and kind of tricking him, turning his comms off and all that kind of stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of that kind of push-pull tension, whereby, yes, he's technically in the role of her master, but I really want to see her challenge him and his philosophy as much as he did for her in that episode 6, Teach Corrupt, and see her trying to dig into his past and get him to talk about the things that he doesn't want to talk about, and kind of see them kind of butt up against each other and what comes out of that.
And again, like you said, it very much ties to what is the conflict of the second season going to be. And we know that there's conflict building with Vernestra, with Kaimir, for lack of a better name. And there's also conflict with potentially Coral, because she's not dead. And also our Dark Master, Plagueis. So there's a lot of Dark Mother, Dark Father motifs that are building, which this couple might try to hide away from, or they might try to be it just sort of depends on what the conflict is, because that will determine how much they actually train, or if they even get a chance to.
Yeah. And then also I think Leslie was saying that there's kind of two possibilities. Either you kind of pick up more or less directly where season 1 finished and you see them kind of go through the training, or I think she was toying with the idea of doing a time jump, so you jump ahead, and
which I'm fully a fan of. I don't need to see them practicing with lightsabers against remotes.
I would like it just because it's sexy.
Oh, okay. Okay. Keep.
I want to see them grappling. I want to see her straddle him and overpower him.
Okay, fine. No, you sold me. Now I have to see it.
You can do that in a montage. There are loads of like, kind of quick ways you can give a taste of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think so much of it will, be dependent on the Plagueis and Fenestra of it all, for sure. Which I guess kind of leads us into the vast majority of the questions that we got from people were essentially asking us like what we think about the future of Oshamir, like how that relationship is going to evolve and how Plagueis's involvement will play into that. And yeah, this idea of like the power of two being essentially doomed if they, stick to the Sith interpretation of that, because obviously that Plagueis and Palpatine are the eventual power of two in the timeline as it goes forth. So yeah, that was kind of the vast majority of the questions that we got. So we can jump into that.
Okay. Marianne Maid said, for those of us that don't really know or care about the lore, what does a satisfying ending look for these two with regards to Plagueis? What is your prediction for May? And she has my whole heart, and beyond the references to Jason Bourne that Leslie has left her story wide open. Yeah. I kind of want to talk about the May stuff and then we can dig into the Plagueis stuff. Yeah. But May herself is on her own journey to get herself out of her maiden arc. She has been reborn, lost these memories, which is, of course, spiritual death, summarizing that. And I think that part of the piece that she was missing was living in her sister's shoes for a while. And so she's going to be associated with the Jedi. We'll question the Jedi from that lens, and we will learn more about her through her and Chimere through her relationship with Vernestra.
Yes. Yeah.
And it'll be an arc to help make her more whole. Yeah. But for those of us who don't care about lore and what does the future look like beyond Plagueis? Well, so if they hang out with Plagueis and listen to everything he says for some reason, yeah, it's doomed. One of them, both of them gonna die. It's gonna happen. It is what it is. But I think that Plagueis represents a new challenge to our lovers, in that they themselves, if left alone, are stuck in not returning from beyond. They're on their little love island, and they need a challenge to help them transform more and accept more of what, and challenge and piece together more of the pieces of their puzzle of their psyche that haven't been challenged previously, especially Chimere. We've been given a lot of hints that he's got the biggest growth to do in the next season with what is represented with Vernestra. And so I think that the ultimate answer is moving beyond the binaries, beyond the idea of the Sith and the Jedi. And to me, the healing could actually look like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, they start the Knights of Ren. I actually think it would be to reinvigorate the Witches' Coven. That would be actually the best solution, because it would be healing the wound that had happened previously.
Yes.
And could heal Chimere in the process, healing the wounded masculine. And we've seen versions of this, like they find an alternative path in other Star Wars stories currently out, like Jedi Survivor, where they have an alternative path. I won't spoil that, but they make a family for themselves elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal that I want to see play out on screen, and that I also think the story is very much telling us that it's interested in, because it's so concerned with like picking apart these binaries and these, opposing institutions, opposing philosophies, and seeing what happens when you have these two people who have been wounded by everything, kind of stuck in the middle between. It's like kids in the middle of divorcing parents, right? You're kind of being pulled in all these like directions. They're pitting you against each other, and then it's like up to the kids to be like, we reject both these things and we want to create something new. So a third way, a middle path, which is the true kind of enlightenment and balance. We incorporate the dark with the light. And
this is what Joseph Campbell calls the mask of God. It's being able to see past binaries, being able to see past good and evil. And, there's just this amazing quote from Leslie in Russian Doll where they're talking about growing up and being an adult is being able to see two oppositionally opposing ideas, both as true in your mind at the same time, is the best of being an adult and a human. And both can be true and you will still be okay is a really big challenge for Star Wars fandom.
Yeah. And it's also like the Rumi poem.
Yeah. Out beyond the light and dark, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Yeah. I'm trying to find the full quote. Yeah, it's out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. There is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. Which, like that kind of sums up.
That's the third path, yeah.
That sums up like what I want to see Osha and Chimera like build for each other, but also like for the world, to kind of show that there is another way of doing things and you don't have to be one thing or the other. You can mix these things, and that's what being a whole person is. And that's also like I feel very confident that Leslie is using the heroine's journey to, shape the arc, in particular, like Osha's arc, and the point that they're at, the point that Chimera comes into her life is like he kind of marks the descent to the goddess. He can push it, gets the kind of push towards that, and that's what the helmet and the cave and everything is. And the heroine's journey, like, I don't think them going forward and trying to fit into a master acolyte apprentice dynamic, that's also not going to lead to wholeness. Neither of them are going to, it's not going to be
all of the symbols and the motifs are telling us that they're trying to break free of the systematic problems that have created the problems in the first place. They might try to fit into the system again, but then they're going to be like, this system doesn't work for us. And it'll be about building something new. It's a big galaxy.
Yes.
I do think that newness will involve community, though. Like, I want to say that. It can't just be something that is just the two of them. It should be a community. I also don't think that the Knights of Ren are actually healthy. So I don't think that that's what they would create. They're not balanced.
Yeah, I don't know enough about them.
Like the Knights of Ren just in the comics, with like, Ben Solo taking them on. They're basically like a biker gang, sort of.
That's the impression. They're not strictly but they're
and a lot of people are like, oh, they're such a cool concept, but in truth they just function as Batman villain henchmen. They've never been deeper than a henchman idea, which is to say, archetypically, when you become a shadow hero, a bully, you often have henchmen that just are shadow versions of you that extend your power. They've never been more than Kylo Ren's entourage, that when he flips back to the light, attack him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the impression that I've always got from how people talk about them. They just kind of sound like a gang of mercenary badasses.
And why we can't get anything out of them is because there is nothing more to get. They're not actually interesting. They are part of Kylo Ren's entourage. It's an unfortunate truth that the Knights of Ren suck, but they're just imagine them as the Riddler or as like the Joker's like little like clown boys that run around with him. That is what they are.
Right. Gotcha.
They're just a reflection of his power and his stretch and extension.
I mean, I guess the, possibility is like you take that concept and be like, this is what it was designed to be at the start, and then it eventually goes on to become just like nothing more than clown boy henchman. But
sure, you could do that if anybody was inspired, but they're not, because the archetype is so clear what they are.
Gotcha.
So I don't think that they're going to be creating of the Knights of Ren, although that's a cool idea, unless the Knights of Ren dissolve sort of like the Republic and everything through entropy falls apart eventually.
Yeah. I mean, I think if anyone could make it actually interesting, like
Leslie could. Yeah, Leslie, we have faith. If that's the story you want to tell, I'm here for it. I have so much faith in you, so do it.
Well, all right. What's the next one?
I think this one is from Elizabeth or at BizBethJ. How do you think the Plagueis reveal is going to impact their relationship in their journey as Sith and as a couple? I think the whole power of two versus the rule of two is an interesting differentiation. Absolutely. I don't know that Chimera ever really thinks of himself as a Sith. Although he says, you may call me a Sith, because you might call me a Sith, because that's what you would classify me as. I sort of wonder, and this is kind of a weird question I've had, if he's not an Acolyte himself.
So this is something I've been wondering. So Acolyte is different to Apprentice. So the Master Apprentice is the main duo.
Yes.
And so what is Acolyte?
Ventress to Count Dooku in the Clone Wars.
Okay.
She was a Sith assassin, but basically an Acolyte to Dooku.
So it's like a rung down from
Apprentice. So
Apprentice is Apprentice.
We're going to talk about Sith for a minute. So Sith, part of their whole vibe is that the apprentice eventually gets an apprentice of their own or an acolyte, and then they overpower the main Sith and take his spot. And then they like move up the food chain. And in fact, there's an entire arc with Vader and Aphra where Vader is going after Palpatine, and Vader's reaction, or Palpatine's reaction, is, I'm so proud you came after me, my boy. Like, you're finally proving you're finally proving you're a Sith, and I can actually give you some of this dark Sith knowledge I've got, because you were just whining about your wife for forever. But that's like their whole thing is like you overcome the master because you've got your own apprentice, or you eventually kill your master in his sleep. I kind of get the vibe that Plagueis might be the apprentice and not the master yet.
Okay.
And Chimera is kind of knows some of the stuff, but doesn't really. And so it's like an alternative path. I could be absolutely wrong. He could totally be the apprentice, but I just get the feeling that like he's off on his own because he's not actually kept close to the master. Yeah.
His whole deal seems to be like very like lone wolf. I operate outside of
which gives
everything.
A Ventress vibe.
Which is like
Acolyte assassin person, not actually in the duo. And I've complained about how the rule of two is actually like a rule of like two-ish, because like there's like the Sith Inquisitors, or the inquisitorial group that Vader controls, that Palpatine made for him and made him manage and keep him busy. And then there's like, Ventress and Savage Perez and Quinlan Voss is an acolyte of Dooku for a while. Like, certainly they were trying. Dooku really tried to take out Palpatine for a while. Kept on bringing in these apprentices.
It's just like a Sith slut. Like collecting a harem. It's a constant carousel of
exactly, because and then he says, "Oh yes, I'm your master and you're my apprentice," but that's kind of outside of the rules of two until
I guess the rule of two more has to do with that constant power struggle.
Yes.
Where the biggest tension is always going to be the two at the top.
Yes.
The Sith is about ultimate power, so someone has to be on top and someone has to be
on
just
bottom,
below,
because it's a domination situation. And so the power of two is that two are coming together as equals to work together, and knowing that power means that also working together as the many is even more powerful. And it's really just a shorthand to show you that you're not as strong as when you're working with other people, or you're aligned to other people, or you have compassion for other people. The society itself is stronger together than it is as individuals and selfish.
And this is why, what I loved so much about the Acolyte and sort of introducing the witch coven is that it gave us this alternative lens to see and manifest the Force through. And it's a very specific collective feminine matriarchal relationship with the Force, where it's a thing that we use as a collective for the betterment of the wider world. And it's not just a selfish thing that I'm coveting and I'm hoarding for myself, and maybe I'll share it with one other person, but only if I have.
And it was always collective, people working together, training together, having conversations together. There was a sense of a democratization of it, that everyone had a voice, even Osha herself in her own future.
Yeah. And you see the other members of the coven, challenge Mother Anasea and call her out on stuff. And I loved that was introduced, and the mantra seems to be the kind of overarching thesis of the show, which, the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. It shows the progression that the show is heading towards. And I think that the power of many will be inclusive of May. This whole episode we're talking about Oshamir as a ship, as a couple, as a power couple, but the end point has to include May in that.
It does, because it's a big family. They're becoming a family. They're becoming a triad, right?
Yes.
I do think that you have in your notes here, it depends on the relationship with Plagueis, what the outcomes will be. And yes, it very much depends on what is the power dynamic between Plagueis and Chimera himself. Will depend on how this plays out. But I think based on the setup of the show being that Mother Anasea created the twins, and that is the exact power that Plagueis himself is after. Osha represents the power of creation and the power of the goddess and the femininity aspect that Plagueis is without. And this is a big metaphor and meta-analysis of how the patriarchy tries to control the power of the feminine. Ty Black has an amazing video out about how stories change and the myth involved in that. And essentially it will become a dark union situation where a dark force is trying to control the feminine, much like sort of Swan Princess or Swan Lake, the story of the dark wizard controlling the swan maiden. And there is a prince that comes and interrupts that. That's the story of Tristan and Isolde and King Mark. There is a dark union that is interrupted by the lover or the alternative path that breaks the dark union.
Yeah, it's what we see in Tross as well.
Yes, we do, yeah.
Trying to, have dark union with Rey and, Ben
Palpatine and then Ben shows up to protect her and help her. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
No, I think I guess what Leslie has specifically said, she says, I would look forward to seeing Plagueis actively disturbing what Chimera and Osha are trying to do. That seems very clear that he is going to get in the middle of that and try to possess Osha in some way or push her, probably by pushing her further and further towards the dark side. And because of how we've seen Kaimai already respond to Osha when she's in pain or when she is, connected to that darkness. I think we're going to see Kaimai at first feel like that's what he wants, but then he sees the reality of that. Yeah, literally, not like that.
Not like that.
It's like, I want my dark bride, but not like that. For sure. And that's such a delicious tension because, then it's going to be a breaking of philosophies between Kaimai and Plague. And again, sort of, he's already rejected the Jedi. We're probably going to see him reject the Sith because it hurts his baby. So, but and I think the key to like truly breaking that and getting to a place where they're free to build something new will involve May 100%.
We've kind of answered some of these questions already from Brinks Nick Colex and and that's a nice bike one.
Yeah.
About like how they would heal. They can't stay on the dark. They'd have to find an alternative path. That's not necessarily gray. That is outside of institutions. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
And then Shihaya Spring. I'm curious about the age gap dynamic that's hinted at with Kaimir's character. What could it mean for theories about how these play into future dynamics? Will it? Okay, so he could be old. He could be older than Soul. I get the impression that he was around when Soul could remember him but couldn't recognize him anymore because he's grown so old. So we're talking Kaimir being over 60, maybe 70 years old, potentially, as a Padawan with Vernestra. I'm speculating here.
Yeah. And again, this is all like, if he is older than he seemed, then that obviously implies that there has been some kind of
manipulation
with the passage of time or aging, midichlorians, Plagueis. So
all of that.
Again, Leslie has kind of told us that, when he's talking about how he used to be a Jedi and he's like, it was a long time ago, she's indicated that there is some significance behind that line.
Yes.
But what that is, we don't know. So it does seem to, the logical way for that to tie in is with this idea of Plagueis being obsessed with keeping people alive, creating life.
Maybe he was an experiment as well. He was found and he was experimented on. That's not outside of the bounds of what Palpatine has done. We've seen happen. So that could also create some sort of dynamic with both Vernestra as well as Plagueis, in that if you are a creature, you're an experimented creature, creates a Frankenstein's monster situation, potentially.
Her husband intensifies.
Yeah, exactly. And how this could play into future dynamics, well, that means symbolically Kaimir is cursed. And so that means that there is a curse to be broken.
Yes, there's true love's kiss.
Yes, exactly. And so that plays into the dynamic in that he has changed archetypes and has become a beastly husband and is in his animal skin, but we have seen the human underneath. So we'll see. It depends on what happens, but there's hints of it going in this direction, certainly.
Yeah. And also just like intensifies the kind of vampire hotness of it all as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Immortality as a questioning of humanity, and then you gain your humanity back. It's just all metaphor for being stuck in the unknown, in the underworld, right? You haven't been changing and growing since you were of a certain age. You're stuck. Yeah. And, I talk about how villains are just stuck in the underworld. They're just stuck in this non-moving forward, non-progression sphere until something, usually another person, comes in there to change it, right? And then they are allowed to transform and change.
Yeah, and in psychology, they talk about how trauma often freezes people at a age or stage of development when the trauma occurred.
Yeah,
and how hard it is to continue to evolve psychologically, emotionally, beyond that until you face the trauma and begin to heal that and your inner child, if it was childhood trauma, which it most often is.
Yeah. And the dark side is a giant metaphor for depression, for trauma, for being stuck in your own shadows that you aren't dealt with and not progressing forward, not owning that, denying it, being stuck in this underworld psychologically.
Yes. Shall we talk about a kiss?
Yes.
We had a couple of questions.
So
with
Caesar
first one,
Salazar?
Yeah. No, I don't know how to that. If and when they #renew the Acolyte, one way I'd love for them, this first part is kind of something different. One way I'd love for them to get Jung Jae Lee to come back for a few episodes is flashbacks to Osha training with Sol during her time as a Padawan. I agree. I think that would be a really cool idea.
Missy and I also talked about how it would be cool if they actually switched up the Force Ghost mythology a little bit to allow Lee Jung-jae to be a Force Ghost.
Yes.
I think that would be really cool.
In whatever form it takes, I would love to see.
Just bring him back, hand wave the Force. The Force, everything is possible. He was burned just like Vader. It's fine.
But most importantly, who do you think is going to initiate the kiss first? And we also got a question from Posy Rosie again. A kiss was already filmed for season 1, but as the actors, Leslie and many of us agree, it felt unearned and not the right time. When do you think the right time would be? Dream up your ideal scenario. Let's fantasize. So
I have been dreaming about this.
Hit us, MC.
Okay,
what you got?
So intensive push-pull of a training scenario where they are physically in each other's spaces and fighting, and she's pinned, she reverses it, he's pinned, maybe he goes 80% and she finishes the 20%.
Interesting. Yes.
I just like the physicality of that, and I like the back and forth. Wrestling,
I mean, any sort of like fighting, wrestling, dueling thing.
It's hot. It's very sexy. Let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would disagree with is that I think the show and the way the Kaima's character has been crafted and the beginning of their relationship, I think that
he wouldn't initiate.
No.
Yeah,
I think it has to be her who. Again, it's symbolic of stepping into that power.
So a different sort of initiation would be like he touches the side of her face and then she kisses him. That would be a different way to go about the, like, I'm interested in you as an opening question.
Yeah, because Kaima kind of, he exists to like open doors and then steps through. Yeah.
So yes, I take it back. There would be some sort of physical intimacy on his part where he would touch her and then she would be like, I kiss you. So in a gentle way. Yeah. That's how I would think. Any other ideas on how this could happen? I just feel like fighting, like wrestling or
I mean,
something
it feels like it makes the most sense in terms of they've been where we leave them.
Yeah.
At the end of the season is like, okay, they're going to be entering into this teacher, pupil, master, acolyte vibe. There's going to be training. There's going to be, fighting with lightsabers. There's going to be this physicality involved that is symbolic of the closeness and intimacy that is growing between them and the tension that's already been established. But yeah, I mean, I trust them because they've done such a good job so far to make it.
Another option would be hurt angst. So like hurt healing, like angst where like she's hurt, he's hurt.
Hurt comfort.
Yeah, sorry. Words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
AO3 tags, yeah.
Yeah. But one of them is hurt and there's a kiss that is initiated as a part of healing. That's also like a really important symbolic motif. So I can see that. I
think it also depends how long they make us wait for it.
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about, beastly husbands, curses,
it would be near the breaking of the curse.
Yeah, which feels like it would be,
later. Yeah.
So it depends what route they go with it. I'm also intrigued as to whether it'll stop at a kiss or if we get an implication of,
because we've had implications in Andor of sex, so it wouldn't be the first time.
We've had sort of they wake up together, or
like they kiss, it cuts to dark, and then they wake up together, and he hands her his coffee mug, and she drinks out of it, and we understand.
And Andor and the Acolyte have the same rating, it's like 12 plus.
So we could do that. Let's do it.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. So if the kiss is as far as it goes, then I think it will be that first kiss will be incredibly at a very significant symbolic moment. But if there is more, then that complicates and gives you somewhere to kind of go.
And oftentimes when there's more of those sorts of relations that happen, relations, I feel like an old woman, when they have sex.
You're a big girl. You can say it.
when they've had sex, oftentimes that's like the pre-battle, everything is changing moment, right? Yes. So it might have
it's another threshold to cross.
It's a threshold, but then everything changes after that as well. So that could also be an indication that things are about to get very dark very quickly.
Yeah. It's like the last shag before we might die.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. And so like you don't bring back characters to tell more stories unless you want them to suffer. Unfortunately, we will watch them suffer as they
conflict, baby.
Conflict is important because it shows us the path through pain and suffering. And so woo. And now on to kind of more general questions. We have Chili Weirdo. If the theme of the first season was an eclipse, what celestial happenings or inspiration do we think season 2 would have?
I don't know. I feel like the eclipse was, I don't know, very much like your wheelhouse, MC, in terms of like, I don't know, it was just like sort of perfect.
It was perfect.
Yeah. And the way we pressed through the posters as well was just like incredible. Like it just all made so much sense.
So well. So it's interesting because we've seen a lot of binary stars in Star Wars symbolically previously. In like the posters for like Reylos related posters, sometimes we've seen binary stars. It's used symbolically. Stars are often used, or suns, and it was interesting in this that like Sol himself represented the thing that like the twin moons were trying to move beyond. So I do think that there is probably some sort of celestial happening. A comet, maybe being Plagueis, something like that. Something that utterly transforms and destroys what you think is happening.
Yeah,
maybe.
Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, I love the fact that they are now. Their like home base is this island that's surrounded by the ocean, which is. And I sort of made a connection between the rhyme that May and Osha have, which is, and they say above is the sun and below is the sea. And like the sun is obviously a star and kind of made me think of Sol, obviously. But then the ocean is ruled by the moon, which is connected to Chimera. So I think his name means moon in Arabic. So yeah, I kind of like that we're now kind of very rooted in this surrounded by the sea kind of vibes. Yeah. So I think it makes perfect sense for there to be a significant moment where she finally joins him in the pool or in the sea or in some kind of shared water situation. There is also a sexy cave hot tub in the boudoir. There's like a pool of water in the middle, which could be the place of something fun. But yeah, I like the idea of her joining him in the water because that seems so symbolic of like him and everything he represents.
As far as like celestial happenings, other fun ones that I'm super a fan of course, is like the one that is based on the weaver and cowherd myth, which is heavily used in Crash Landing on You, Lori, with the connection of the two lovers across the Milky Way. And so there's and how the birds, the magpies, help them connect with the bridge of birds every season when they align. I love that celestial happening. This is more of a question for the audience. I want everyone to dream about this because there's a lot of things they could go with, but I like the idea of a comet or like a meteorite crashing down and destroying their pleasantness and the conflict that would ensue. Yeah.
Yes. And then our last question is from Ty at Black_TYM. Would love to hear your thoughts on the binaries and gender flipping aspects of the show. I think a lot of it we kind of touched on in terms of how Chimera is positioned as a kind of femme-gaze romantic lead, in terms of being coded as more feminine, in terms of being much more open and receptive to being in touch with emotions, and how kind of soft and gentle he is with Osha instead of trying to
nurturing, making food, caring for her,
like
wearing
her
softer clothing.
Yeah, and just like the very soft way he gazes at her and her and all those kind of things, and is very much like, just taking a very kind of gently approach instead of trying to strong arm her in a very toxic masculine way. And then you were talking about Osha's, could be interpreted as slightly more masculine. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. And so Osha herself is presented, although as a maiden, as a mechanic, a mechanic, who does a very hard job that even is mentioned multiple times, how it's a job that only droids are allowed to do. It's a very badass thing that she does, which is goes outside of the ship to fix the ship. Which is more of a traditional, like, masculine type profession. She also, outside of the archetype that she is in, once she is in sort of her path to the dark side, takes absolutely control of the situation and is leading the whole way and, turning off his controls in the ship.
She's literally in the driving seat.
Yeah, exactly. She's literally in the driving seat.
In the cockpit.
And the cockpit, yeah. And so it's just showing this idea of Chimera representing more femininity and Osha representing more masculinity in how they present to each other, especially like her aggressiveness towards him in Teach Corrupt, is the idea that you can find balance in a multitude of different ways with a potential partner or lover. And to me, that's what it's been showing, in that beyond binaries is not just about light and dark. It's also gender typical roles.
Yeah. It's picking apart all the binaries that we're kind of encouraged to, adhere to.
Because of dominator culture, the patriarchy wants you to fit into the specific narrow box that you're allowed to fit into.
So you can be controlled.
And you can be controlled. And if you are beyond that, you are transcendent and not controllable.
Exactly.
Yes. Which is, what the witches were trying to tell us early on.
Yeah. I mean, the whole message is listen to witches.
Yeah. Listen to the feminine.
They got it figured out.
They really know what they're talking about. I think that we talked about quite a lot.
Yes, we did.
The only thing is I would say that the appeal of this is so universal that like when people see it, even just in moments, even in just TikToks or whatever, they're very drawn to it. It's similar to how, like even people are drawn to Deirdre and Cyril in Andor.
Yeah.
Right? Because of their like dynamic, and people can see it and they're shipping them. You know, we see it a lot with the EU and Legends with Luke and Mara Jade, and that aspect, and the idea of them working together and training together was always very sexy. Revan and Bastila in the EU Legends as well. And it's so powerful that many people are drawn to Asian dramas, C-dramas, K-dramas, etc., because of this dynamic of being more prevalent in those stories. Yeah. I can name many teacher-pupil stories in C-dramas that just like are very, very appealing, whereas like all of this kind of plays out in a very similar fashion. Why are they so popular? Well, because we're not getting them in Western media.
Yeah. We're very starved of explicit, intentional romance and sexuality and desire playing out on screen, especially in these kind of dark and light tropes and enemies to lovers and that kind of built-in tension, push-pull dynamics. It just is universally sexy.
It's a powerhouse if people give it a chance. Like, you think of how popular Phantom of the Opera has been from a musical perspective for decades.
Yeah, it endures.
It endures because we
go away.
Are drawn to the darkness.
Yeah.
And we want to romance the darkness.
Generation after generation.
Yeah. And it doesn't grow old because we always have this need to imagine a reality that is outside of the bounds of the societal ideas.
Yeah. And also this idea of like someone holding up a mirror to you who on the surface is so different from you, but showing both of you realizing how similar you are and also what you can learn from each other in order to like grow together as individuals, as a couple dynamic. Like, that is something that most of us like search for in real life as well, you know, through family, through friends, through romantic partners, through wider community. Like, all storytelling is just people trying to figure out life and the world, themselves and the people around them. And there are so many shapes that takes, and this kind of romantic dynamic is one form that is just incredibly intoxicating and appealing, and that, you know, not just within Star Wars, but especially in Star Wars, has often been really lacking, or has not ended well, or has been much more subtextual. And I think that's why it's so exciting for this ship to have been born out of this wonderful show that is doing so many clever, nuanced, complex things and digging into all that stuff, and is kind of all the themes of the show are represented in this relationship.
Which is good storytelling, because you want to have the characters and the relationships and those dynamics reflect the macro story as well as the small insular story. And we connect to it as humans because we too want to know that our darkness will be loved.
Yes. And it's just felt like so refreshing, not just what we're getting on screen, but also like having a showrunner and a creator talk about it so candidly.
Honestly,
and be like, it's not in your heads. Everything you're seeing is intentional, and the way that you're interpreting it is how it was intended, which has not always been the case in the past. So it feels very affirming, very validating for people who have been in the trenches for a while to be so kind of seen and valued by the content of a show and by the creator of that show. And I think that's why this show just kind of feels like such a warm hug, but also like a sexy caress at the same time.
Yes.
It's ticking all the boxes.
It's
so
great.
good.
It's very giving. And through that giving story to us, it also creates a lot of creative energy through the resonance that it gives us, because it's speaking on so many levels, not just textually, subtextually, but also this symbolic motif level that we have gone into in depth over the last many hours.
We were like, we gotta keep it short.
No, we didn't. I'm so sorry, Lori. I'm not sorry to our listeners, but I am sorry to you.
Well,
but
it's fine.
We could talk more about this. That's the crazy thing is there's so much to dig into. I want to hear more people's thoughts. I love threads on Twitter. I love Tumblr posts. I love people digging into the themes and motifs and what they think is going to happen. I'm obsessed with picking up the new fanfics as they come out, seeing all the fan art. I love this creative energy that we're getting from this show.
Yeah. No, it feels really good, especially as someone who, like you said at the top of the show, like I got into Star Wars like pretty late in the grand scheme of things, and I got into it at a very weird time. I got into it 2019, like
right before The Rise of Skywalker came out, and you're like, "What is happening?"
So I had this kind of this brief glimpse at the fandom, our corner of the fandom at least, at its most kind of excited and creative, and all this metamythic analysis. And it feels like this is the first time since that point that we've had that kind of same energy and enthusiasm and creative, just revitalization of the fandom.
I would say that it was like it was injected with all sorts of new fresh air and energy. And I am very, very thankful for it because it makes me want to revisit older Star Wars stories, much like you're doing with your friend. I want to revisit
my Acolyte.
Your Acolyte. I want to revisit them with my kids. And, like I want to they literally finished the Acolyte and they said, I want to rewatch all the movies. Isn't that what Star Wars wants?
Yeah.
Isn't that the point? Is that good Star Wars makes you want to live longer in the world?
Yeah. And like I'm rewatching all the films, and now via the lens of having just watched the Acolyte, and it's enriching them and adding new things and adding more context, and that's like such a beautiful thing. I love it.
Well, Lori, thank you for joining me. We weren't nearly as bad as I thought we might be.
No, I was so nervous before.
You were not nearly as feral as you purported you would be. But we were very smart.
I was actually worse behaved at Star Wars Celebration.
Like you said some amazing things at Star Wars Celebration. But no, I mean, if you want to go back and listen to Lori and I and our good friend Rachel talk about the sequel trilogy from a heroine's journey perspective. We did a fan panel at Star Wars Celebration. I will link to it in the liner notes, and it's on YouTube, and there's cool slides. They were very beautifully done, and you can listen to that and kind of get another lens to the sequel trilogy if you haven't heard about it from this perspective before.
Yes, and I'm much more feral on that. I talk a lot about Rian Johnson's leather glove kinks.
Yes.
There's that. I've been very well behaved today.
I think that there is actually a lot of really important psychological and symbolic pieces that we wanted to dig into. So, why it works is, to me, very, very important, and why we're drawn to it is sort of like unlocking what this looks like and why we're craving it for ourselves.
Yes.
Lori, where can people find you and your work? Strange Case, available on Audible now.
Available on Audible. And other than that, I am doing a lot of screaming on Twitter at the moment, at Laurie, LAURIE K_A. I've been nonstop screaming about the Acolyte for the past month, and I'm very involved in the hashtag Renew the Acolyte campaign. Please get involved with that. And yeah, because we need more of this story.
We absolutely do. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. You can support the show directly on Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love What the Force: Sophie H., Scott, Derek C., Minky Moo, Sarah Joy, John, In Wild Space, How Rude, Anna Perez, Neil, Christian Luca, Carly Ann, Scott C., and Susan. Support the show by wearing the Force with our merch, like and subscribe on YouTube, or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or any other pod app. It helps people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook. Our website is whattheforce.ca, or the Discord. Links are in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.
You look exactly like her.